Okay. Okay. All right, we are live. Go ahead, Alicia.
I'd like to call to order the meeting for Economic Development Committee, February 22nd.
All right, Callie Maxfield.
Here.
Bruce Kramer is absent with prior notice. Carrick Brown.
Here.
Erica Winston.
Here.
Steve Langley.
Here.
Carol Noker.
Here.
Kelly Kabilski.
Here.
Jason Hoyt.
Here.
Millie Shanae.
Here.
Next item we have are the minutes.
I'd like to motion to approve the minutes from January 25th.
So move.
In a second.
Second.
Any discussion on those? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, reports. Chamber of Commerce.
Erica Winston with the Chamber of Commerce. I am now the Executive Director for the Chamber of Commerce.
Congratulations.
didn't know
Last
that.
week. Thank you. We did have one new member, Smithfield Hay, join just this last week. And we are still selling tickets for the March 1st event, the crawfish boil out at the American Legion. And our next luncheon is March 9th, and Playclat Electric is the sponsor.
Thank you. School District, Carol?
Okay, not a lot, just a few things. Be on the lookout for some information about a community forum coming up on April 19th. That will be held together, input on this master building plan that'll be coming up. Board election is April 5th. And school administrators met with Project Velvet. That's the data center. I guess the timeline has been pushed back slightly for that, but as far as the pilots and those payments, those have not been changed at all. Be on the lookout for information on a groundbreaking and a name announcement in March. And the last, I'll add in my piece with the real world learning. We're currently working with about 40 client businesses around the community on some real world learning projects. And so we just want to thank the community for all of the help and the input that they're given to this. It's been fun. It's been great.
Alicia?
Yes. For Main Street, we are working on an SEG, a grant for an SEG interchangeable mural, which is like a silicone to edge mural sign that would go on the back of the main stage on the courtyard. It could be changed out seasonally or for events and things, and it's lit. It's backlit. So I can forward around the rendering of the one that we have. It's really cool. It looks like old Main Street on the back. So it could be changed for festival or chamber events or whatever. We are also looking for letters of support, and we do have a sample letter. So if anyone would like to help us with that, that would be great. We have our list of 2022, the big events for Main Street. April 30th is the Kentucky Derby wine walk. May 14th, we're teaming up with the mayor's bike race. They're also going to have a health fair with a focus on mental health. I think Darla, the counselor that works over here on Bridge Street, has a lot of really great vendors and things lined up for that. July, didn't write down the date. July, we have our whiskey walk. We're working on building more vendors for that this year. Junkville will be the same day as the barbecue, which is September 27th-ish. Yes, the fourth Saturday. We're working on some fun things with that. And then the fall wine walk with the Christmas event, Christmas vendor event is, I believe, November 12th. Would have helped if I would have wrote down. I made a spot for it, but I didn't write it. Volunteer recruitment. If anyone here isn't burnt out on volunteering for things, we're definitely looking for people to help us with those events. And we're also working on a business inventory of all the businesses within our downtown perimeters to help. We send them to Main Street. Everything's kept, I don't want to say anonymous, but it's just compiled together as a city to help them with future grants, to show the representatives and people in Missouri that these grants do help and that our downtowns are flourishing with them. So I think that is all I have.
Thank you. And as far as staff report, just a development update for you all, what's happened. There's a couple things in here that have happened in a little bit further back than a month past, but good information nonetheless. 21 new single family permits and 1 tenant finish permit have been issued since January 1st of this year. 2 of the 3 buildings in phase 1 of the attic storage of Smithfield projects are complete, with the main facility with conditioned space yet to start construction, and that's anticipated to start early spring. The KCI RV storage facility finished its 3rd building last week, and their next phase will be moving dirt along 169 and starting the RV park portion of the project in the spring. The dental office in the marketplace is complete with construction. They are waiting for a medical gas to arrive for final installation, and they've indicated they'll open in late spring, early summer because of that. Jimmy John's has started tenant finish at the marketplace in the last 2 weeks. They have not indicated an anticipated opening date, even though we will continue to ask for that. Eagle Ridge Housing Subdivision has begun construction of 5 townhome buildings, which will total 10 dwelling units. 5 more buildings as soon as the first 5 will start once the first 5 are completed. Diamond Creek is making continual progress on construction of the public infrastructure portion, and houses in Diamond Creek are anticipated to be able to begin early summer. So lots of exciting things happening, a lot to look forward to as well. That is my staff report. We want to go on to action items. During our last meeting, we went over community improvement districts. Megan went through education on those. We were able to have conversations, discussions, and as such. Hopefully, those who were absent were able to catch up a bit and take a look at the previous one. So what I'd like to do going through here, through the CID recommendations, is open the floor to any initial recommendations that you may all have. And then make sure to give everyone the opportunity to speak as far as any further recommendations. Again, we also have Megan with us, and she will be able to answer any questions as well that you may have. I'll just open the floor. No initial questions? Any recommendations on any restrictions that you'd like to place on CIDs? I have listed a few different things that you are able to restrict. That is up to you, though. Restricting some of these may not be in the best interest of the city. Those are just things that you can restrict if you wish to.
Yes, I'd like to hear some examples or things that we can pretty strict, please.
Yeah, so if you take a look at the staff report for the Community Improvement District recommendations, there are 3 different things that we could set for recommendations. We could set a different limit of years that the CID can be in place. Currently, the max is 27 years. We could set a preference for a city or a developer-controlled board of the CID. For example, the current CID that we have in Marketplace is a developer-controlled. That means that's less work on city staff. There is one city representative on the CID board that is myself, or my position at least. And so there is representation on the board. So we can set a preference for that. And then we can also set a preference for certain sized projects. Not seized. Apologize. Yes, so a minimum of 2 million or a maximum of so many. I believe with the TIF incentive, we set a recommendation of minimum $2 million projects. That is something that we can continue with in this incentive as well.
Could you repeat the options for the CID board? You said the city panel would be how many representatives?
The amount of representatives on the board, I believe, changes with each CID. Megan?
Yes. So a CID can have between 5 and 30 board members, which, by the way, is a ridiculous range. But usually it stays around 5 to 7. So it kind of differs between cities. We have some cities that like to be heavily involved and like to have a city controlled board, which just means that, like, out of the 5, right, 3 are city staff city staff. And then the rest are developer. This, like Anna said, the Smithfield Commons is developer controlled, which means that 4 of the seats are held by property owners. And then 1 of the seats is held by the assistant city administrator. It's specifically tied to that position at the city. And we, like I said, we have some cities that do not want to be involved at all. And so they just let the developers control the CID boards. And, you know, there are ways, even if it is a developer controlled board, like actually Smithfield Commons, we drafted in the cooperative agreement that before, you know, there has to be city approval for projects. So the city knows what projects are going into the CID. So there are ways that you can limit, you can still make sure the city has say, I guess is what I want to say. So.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of a city controlled board?
The advantages, just would be that the city knows exactly what's happening, right? I mean, it is a political subdivision, and most times there is public tax dollars that are running through that entity. And so cities would like to know that the CID is being run according to statute, and all of those costs that public tax dollars are funding are allowable under the statute. They're public improvement costs. And the con would be, just like Anna said, it is a more time that the staff's going to have to put into it. It's just, it's more work that they have to do. So
the sentence says set a preference for city or developer. So we're not really determining if it has to be city or developer. We're just making a recommendation at this
Correct.
point.
Yes.
Yes.
And then the city still decides, the Board of Aldermen, I assume, then decide on any particular project if it's city or developer.
exactly. It could come in that whenever we draft, so CIDs are done by petitions. When the petition comes in, it can be negotiated that the city wants control or the city doesn't want control of that particular board.
My initial preference in this case, since you described it that way, would be city controlled board, recognizing the Board of Aldermen still decides if it's going to be city or developer. Leave it up to the alderman anyway, whether it's city or developer.
I kind of like the idea of having Anna, sorry, on the board, but I feel like maybe for like our first go round with that particular developer, maybe until we kind of develop, a trust with them, I guess. I don't know if that's common or not, but then maybe if a new developer comes on that we haven't worked with as a city, then we have someone from staff go.
So that's actually doable too. So when you draft the petition, you generally set who the initial board's going to be, but then you have successor directors. So you could initially set the board as city control, but then allow later on that the successor directors could be not city positions or tied to city staff. You could allow it to be, anybody. And when these boards are done, I should note that whenever you are appointing successor directors, it generally goes through the mayor. If it's not an election process, then they're appointed by the mayor. So the city would know who was being appointed as a successor director, right? So they would still have control over that as well.
Yeah, so the mayor on an annual basis re-elects or elects new individuals to that board. I believe we did that recently.
Mhm.
A couple months ago.
Gotcha.
What's the definition of city staff?
Usually that's someone within the administrative office. So city administrator, myself, finance director,
Paid staff.
correct.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be tied to that, but that's generally what it is.
Well, I'm just going to go against all the odds. My recommendation is developer board. As long as a city and we all have a say so, that's a lot of time. And I think as a developer, they know what they want and what they need to do, the project timelines. And I just don't know if city staff should necessarily have to do all that. Personally.
I will say too, a lot of this falls on legal counsel. The, drafting, putting the meetings together, drafting everything, going over cost certification. So I will say, even though Smithfield Commons is a developer controlled board, I'm still reviewing their cost certifications, which means all their invoices are coming through me. I'm reviewing them to make sure that they're public improvements. So a lot of that falls on legal counsel, but you're right. I mean, it's still a lot of work.
And we are thankful for you doing that for us.
I just feel there's so many hands that are in it anyways.
Yes.
If it's, like you said, everyone's got a piece that they have to do anyways, as long as we have city representation. And like I said, Board of Aldermen, we have our policies in place.
And the current situation that we have with the Cid at Marketplace has worked out great so far. The relationship that we have with them over the last several years, our roles in those have worked out pretty well. Any other comments? I mean, we've got 2 recommendations on the table at this point. Other thoughts?
I was just gonna say, I like developer driven, and the reason why is the voice of the city is still there with you, Anna, at this time. And like you said, it's an annual review, but when you go city driven, what worries me is you've got some of these projects that are 20, 25 years long, and although you can go back in and redirect it if you want to, you're strapping the city to a project for 25 years, where you get to the end of that and the city's pretty much removed because the project is already on its own. So it's just something I look at there, but also, do we limit the number of years? That's another great question. I don't know. My opinion is 27 is a long time. And size, definitely. I definitely think there needs to be a minimum. I don't know where to set that. I know the TIF, you said, was it 2 million? Is that what we decided on that one?
Yep.
So I think that would be a great starting place.
Okay.
But that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Are CIDs normally a smaller project than Smithfield?
What was the
Not
question?
necessarily. Are CIDs normally a larger or a smaller project than TIF?
Anna's right. It really depends. I mean,
Okay.
you have them on huge retail projects, but also like City River Market in Kansas City. There's a CID that overlays that, and it funded
right.
park benches and trash cans, and it does CIDs. Can also fund murals and any of the interchangeable flags that they hang up. So it could be that you just have, and actually. There's a CID, I believe, in downtown Independence that does that. They do snow removal and then they put up Christmas lights. And so it's not necessarily that it's a large project. It just brings in sales tax dollars to then just fund those little things.
Okay, then I changed my
I was gonna say.
recommendation. Sorry, I didn't know you could go that granular with CID. So I definitely think that we need to think a lot lower than 2 million. I'm
That's
sorry,
what,
I was looking.
that's where I was
wrong.
going with that.
Yeah, I with those types of projects and things you can do in downtown and different things like that, I definitely think you need to, I don't know what a low dollar would be, but 500,000. If we're doing something like murals and benches and things like that, I think that's a great thing to look at.
Does it make sense to set those kinds of limits when there are such vast differences in CIDs?
But they can layer this with the TIF too, so,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's, I mean,
So the larger projects, you
Right.
can have that. You can have both of them on there anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you could also limit it to, you can have, CID, just general CID, you can go for those granular things, like I said, but if a company is coming in wanting to do multiple incentives, then if you're going to layer a CID on top of a TIF, then it needs to be a larger project.
So as far as we kind of veered away from the controlled boards conversation. So I've got 1 for city and 2 for developer. What are other people's thoughts?
As long as there is representation of the city always, I think it's fine for it to be developer. But again, every case is so unique and different. Again, this is a recommendation, so we can make that recommendation when it's appropriate. But we always will have city representation.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'll recommend developer also.
Alicia, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think as long as we've got one city person that's there, then developer is great.
Garrett?
I'll agree with developer as well.
Erica?
I'll agree with developer.
All righty. All right, and then back to size projects. We've got 500,000 as the minimum on the table at the moment.
my recommendation was gonna be 750.
Okay.
750,000. Either here or there.
So my concern with setting a higher minimum are those smaller downtown projects. Because you never know, that is a possibility in the future.
Yeah, I agree. Just thinking about the things that we've kind of price checked for our downtown area. I can't remember, the interchangeable flags were purchased before I started on the EDC, but I want to say they were like 20 grand for them for the 2 sets. I don't know if we have 50. I'm not sure, but
I'm not sure.
just doing those flags.
But this would
add
be
up quick.
over the lifetime of the CID. So this is over a possible up
Mhm.
to 27 years.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think 500 would be fair.
Megan, what has been the minimum in the past? Like, what do you see as an average minimum size
Oh,
project?
well, that's a really good question. Like with the downtown Independence TIF, I mean, they submitted the petition and just said, we want to do these betterment projects. And so they didn't really have a number in mind. They knew
Okay.
that, these were the revenues that we're going to be generating. We projected out based on what sales were within the CID, what the revenues were. And they were like, okay, well, we know if these are the revenues that we're going to have, then we're going to be able to do the Christmas lights and this festival and this festival. And then that's going to take up all of our revenue. So a lot of times, we see developers like Smithfield Commons that are doing a large, a $12 million project that will do a CID, knowing eventually, that those revenues will be coming in that can pay them back for their approved costs. But if you've got small ones, I mean, yeah, they don't really have a project amount.
So we could set the minimum for 20,000, just like
Oh,
you said,
yeah.
if a city just wanted to cover the flat, the decorations type.
I mean,
And then I'm kind of changing my whole mind then.
I mean.
I say we bump it down.
Well, you don't even need to set a minimum.
That was gonna be my next question is like, can we make it a case by case
That's just
scenario?
something that you can do.
And that's my vote is just
Leave it.
leave it.
Okay.
That's
Other
my
opinion?
vote. I can't speak for everyone.
I was on the same page. I don't know that because they're, again, since there's such a broad range, does it make sense? It doesn't make sense to me to
Mhm.
set a limit at this point in time.
I'm seeing a lot of nods, so we're good. Okay, and then we talked briefly about limit of years. 27 is the statutory limit.
I know I don't like 27 years, but I don't know what's a good number.
Megan,
20
what-
pops into my head, but I think that's a fair amount, depending upon the size of the project though, so.
Right.
Thank you.
So if it's a project like Smithfield Commons that, that the revenue's coming in, it's going to take some time for it to generate the type of money to pay back for the public improvements. That would be a longer one. Or, if you've got
Mhm.
something that you just want to, like a downtown, you just want to do a couple of
Right.
projects, you could do that for 10 years. Obviously the current statutory maximum is brand new. CIDs used to be able to be indefinite. It has just so, the 27 years bonds issued by a CID have a maximum of 20 years. So that's, if they were to issue bonds, they can only issue them for 20 years. So 20 is a good number as well.
Opinions on 20 years.
I think a max of 20 years is plenty, but
20 years sounds good to me.
I agree, 20.
All right. So we've gone through the list that I've provided. Is there anything else that you all wanted to discuss about SIDS or have any questions on them that you would want to impose any further restriction? No? All right. Well, thank you all. So I will need, since this is an action item, I will need a motion and a second and a vote. So what the recommendation would be a limit of 20 years. And these are our recommendations or preferences. Set a preference for developer controlled boards. And not to set a minimum for projects.
I motion to approve.
All in favor?
I.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all. Next, we have our discussion portion. We are going to be going over TDDs this evening, which are transportation development districts. Megan has a slideshow that she'll go through. Do you
My
wanna take
trusty
over the screen?
slideshow.
Your trusty slideshow. Do you want to take over the screen? I've got it loaded up too if you need to. Okay.
Yeah, I
sounds
can
good.
take over. All right. Before I start this, I just want to say transportation districts are complicated and there's a lot that goes into them. And I think we're comfortable with each other now that please stop me if I'm going too fast or you've got any questions, because there's a lot that go into a transportation development district. So we will start with that. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, but it's not the presentation screen.
Yes, it
There
should be
it
now.
is.
Yay. Okay. All right. So transportation development districts. What are TDDs? Well, exactly what they sound like. They fund transportation related projects. So fund, promote, plan, design, construct, improve, maintain, and operate. They, again, similar to CIDs, are created following the submission of a petition. However, this is submitted in the court system. This is literally the only time I ever go to court, is to do transportation development districts. It's my least favorite thing. So there are multiple ways that TDDs can be created. There are a standard petition or a joint petition. So a TDD may be created by, number one, at least 50 registered voters within the proposed TDD, or if there are no registered voters, the owners of all the real property located within the proposed TDD, or the governing body of a local transportation authority. So an LTA, just as a definition, because we'll be using this a lot, a local transportation authority is a county, city, village, county highway commission, special road district, any local political subdivision having jurisdiction over a bridge, street, highway, dock, wharf, ferry, lake, river, airport, railroad, any other transit improvement. So that's your standard petition. Those first three are what we call a standard petition. Now your next two are a joint petition, which means, number four, 2 or more local transportation authorities may adopt resolutions calling for the joint establishment. So Raymore and Belton did one. Raymore and Belton together started a TDD, and so that would be a joint petition, or at least 50 registered voters of 2 or more counties. So any questions about the creation of a TDD and who can file the petition? All right, go to the next slide. So the petition is drafted, filed in the circuit court of the county in which a majority of the TDD is located. That gets really fun, by the way, when you have to start getting down into miles. The court holds a hearing, and if there's voter approval requested, an election is held and a majority voter is required to approve the formation. So basically the court goes in and determines that if the TDD is not legally defective, and the method of funding is not illegal or unconstitutional, then it's good to go. If the petition was filed by the governing body of a local transportation authority, the court certifies questions regarding the creation, the project development, the proposed funding for the for voter approval. This always gets really, really fun, let me tell you. Whenever you're filing this in a court system for a judge that has never heard about TDDs before, and you have to explain that nobody's contesting it and it's just a project. It's always really interesting. So our funding sources, again, pretty similar to everything else we've talked about. Special assessments, which must be approved by a majority of qualified voters or all owners of record signing a special assessments petition. So just the definition of qualified voter are the registered voters within the TDD. And if there are no registered voters, which is generally the case, it's generally the property owners within the TDD are voting that. And so then it's generally 1 vote per acre, which is different than a lot of the way others are voted in, but this is 1 vote per acre. Okay, real property taxes, which must be approved by 4/7 of qualified voters voting. Sales tax, which is generally the funding mechanism that we see. It must be approved by a majority of the qualified voters, or voters approve a joint petition using an integrated sales tax only ballot. And that sales tax generally is imposed in increments of 1/8 up to 1%. We generally see a straight 1%. So this is kind of interesting. If a registered owner moves into a TDD that has already been created and which no registered voters previously resided in, the registered voter must elect whether to vote as a registered voter or a property owner. So that always gets fun. Every year that we do this, we check to see if any registered voters have moved into the TDD to see if they'll be the voting authority or not. So any questions about those funding mechanisms? Okay. Additionally, there's an alternate sales tax, which in lieu of the sales tax on the last slide, for a TDD that is composed of all of one or more entire counties or cities, or a county and a city outside its boundaries. It must be approved by a majority of qualified voters of a TDD voting in a state general, primary, or special election, or voters approve a joint petition using a sales tax only ballot. And then also toll roads, which again must be approved by the majority of qualified voters. And we do see that a lot. Actually, Sunrise Beach down by the lake, the toll road there was a TDD. The Transportation Development District can also issue bonds, but they can also be issued by the local transportation authority. They are payable from the revenues of the TDD. They have a maximum maturity of 40 years. And then revenue bonds are solely the obligation of the TDD and not any political subdivision. So if the TDD wanted to issue bonds and didn't themselves want to issue them, and instead the city were to issue them, the city does not put any of their general funds. They don't back them at all. It is only, the bonds are only paid for by the revenue that is generated within the district by its funding mechanism. And that's similar to CID bonds. So how is a TDD governed? Well, very similar to, again, CIDs. It's governed by a board of directors. So if a TDD is formed by 2 or more local transportation authorities, the board will consist of the presiding officer and 1 person chosen by the governing body of the local transportation authority, or the presiding officer of each local transportation authority, which in the city's case would be the mayor. If not formed by 2 or more local transportation authorities, the directors are chosen by the qualified voters within the TDD. And so every year at the annual meeting, the property owners vote for the board members. All right, move on. So this is a list, a pretty, excuse me, comprehensive list of what TDDs can fund. So as you can see, they're obviously all transportation related. And the fun thing about TDDs is not only are these types of projects allowed, but also any similar or related improvement or infrastructure. So we as a firm, when we do these, have gotten comfortable with a TDD also funding stormwater improvements underneath a road, because obviously if it's raining, there's nowhere for that water to go. But sanitary and water lines are a no-go. So it's kind of funny, these questions come up all the time, and we get pretty into the nitty-gritty about what everybody's comfortable with things being funded, what similar or related improvement or infrastructure may mean. And it's also important to note that dissimilar to a CID, projects can actually be built outside of the TDD boundaries as long as it benefits the TDD itself. So that is something that's very different, because like I've stated, CIDs can only fund things that are within the boundaries of the CID. So any questions about projects? All right, move on. So generally, when you're looking at TDDs, there are 2 types of projects, and that's a project that's going to be merged into the state highways and transportation system, and one that is not intended to be merged into that. So a lot of these, obviously, TDDs are very complicated and they're complex to do, and they take a lot of time. So we don't see a lot of TDDs except for ones that are MoDOT's going to be a part of. So I've been working on a TDD. If you're going to Lee Summit, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Paragon Star project, but the soccer complex that's going to be outside of Lee Summit. We formed a TDD down there to redo that interchange. And so whenever you're involving something that's going to be merged into the state highway system, you have to involve MoDOT. And so the TDD has to submit the project for approval with the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission. They're with you every step of the way. They're one of the respondents when you file with the courts. They sign off on everything. They help not build the project, but they help design the project a lot of times, just make sure it's within their standards. But like I said, also non-highway projects can be built as well. but the TDD still has to submit the project to the local transportation authority that will eventually become the owner if it, is going to be dedicated to that local transportation authority. I will say that, I've not seen this, but MoDOT can actually decline a project if they have no direct interest in it. So then if that happens, then obviously approval of that project vests exclusively in that local transportation authority. So any questions about that? All right. So an interesting thing about TDDs is that there is actually a statutory requirement that they are dissolved. So once the projects are completed and they're either transferred in ownership to the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission or the local transportation authority, and then once, the TDD has no liability. So like if they issue bonds, the bonds are paid off. The TDD will commence the solution proceedings and they will dissolve the TDD, which obviously includes qualified voter approval. So in the instance where there's no registered voters within the district, the property owners make the determination to dissolve. I've dissolved a TDD where the project never got built. That also happens. But we've also dissolved a TDD where the project was completed and it was just ready to go. I will state that there are no TDDs can go indefinitely. And actually, we're going to talk about one. Well, it's not necessarily going to be going indefinitely, but if there is continuing to be projects for the TDD, it can continue to run. Like I said, as long as there's projects to be completed. So obviously with all of our special districts, there is ongoing compliance with the state is required. So there is an audit. So at least once every 3 years, the state auditor is required to audit each TDD. And there's always an annual report. So TDDs make annual financial reports to the state auditor. And this one's kind of interesting. There is a $500 per day fine that begins after they notify you if you haven't sent the report. And that racks up fast, but that hasn't happened to me. We always get, anytime we represent a TDD, that we get our reports in on time. So that's our ongoing compliance. And so there are no TDDs in Smithville, but one that I actually work on, I didn't form it, but I work on it, is the Highway 71-291 Partners in Progress TDD in Harrisonville. So if you're driving down the highway, it's the interchange that's right next to the Ford dealership. This is a very successful TDD. That's obviously one of the diverging diamond interchange, and they have continued to make improvements all along the road. It's a pretty significant TDD. It's very large. It was formed in 2008, still ongoing. It obviously covers quite a big retail district, so they have a good flow of funds to continue to make improvements to the roads there. They have a 1% sales tax. And like I said, built that interchange at the intersection of Interstate 49. So that's kind of a fun one. It's been a very successful project. So, all right. Let me see. Anna, you might have to help me. I'm not sure I remember how to.
Oh, you
stop
need me to
sharing.
take you off?
Yeah, I'm not sure I remember how to stop sharing. I got to learn how to do that. Oh, now I know. There it is. So like I said, TDDs, they're just a lot of work to form one because you have to go through the court system and there's obviously the added complication of the qualified voters. So.
Again, can you talk a little bit more about the city's role in a TDD? This is a little bit different. It's not a developer approaching the city to do a project. It's more of a partnership.
Yes, that's I'll use Harrisonville as an example. That's a great point, Anna. So obviously this isn't something that, well, I guess it kind of depends. The city's going to be involved because generally they're going to be the local transportation authority unless it's at the county level, right? So the city will be involved in that respect. But the board doesn't have city members. Like the one in Harrisonville, we have I believe the city staff, yeah, they come and they sit and they listen. They also propose projects. So they approached the board a few years ago to redo all the streetlights along that road, and the TDD funded that. So Anna's right. It is definitely more of a partnership with your local transportation authority. Unless it was begun by the local transportation authority and not property owners. And then if it was a joint petition, you have your presiding officers that kind of control the board. Yeah, it really just depends what type of TDD it is, but a lot of the ones that we do are started by property owners. And then again, you're just flowing through with a partnership with your local transportation authority at that point.
Thank you. Any initial questions? I know it's a lot. And I know that Megan and I, we detailed it down just to the information that was more specific to city and our
Got too
involvement.
excited. Yeah. I cut down like
And
5 slides.
Yes, we cut down slides. But any initial questions on how
I
TDDs work?
appreciate it being more concise. Thank you. So is the city of Smithfield considered forming a TDD
Not at this moment.
in prior history?
Not that I
Not-
know of.
Yeah,
Okay.
not to my knowledge. This information is just for our incentive toolbox that if in the future we may want to approach it, we know how.
So tonight we're just going over it. Next meeting will be when we make our recommendations.
Correct.
What if we go ahead and get some examples now of the recommendations that we will need to make, and then everyone can kind of think about that so that we're a little more prepared to make those next time?
Is that something you could email out to us?
Yes, and we can do
that'd
that
be
too.
great.
So, because I know you probably don't have a list made.
Thank you.
So my question, would this be something good? Let's say housing development is trying to go in, apartment whatever. Would a developer try to use this with the city to partner with, like, to improve the flow of traffic? Streets or like street lights, roundabout, is this something that a developer would potentially try and partner with to improve our city streets? Is that something we could do with this?
I believe so. They would have to go through the petition format to the county. So
Okay.
they could approach the city, but theoretically they could go straight to the county without us.
Okay.
Correct, Megan?
Yes, but come on, because it,
Go back
this is
and
where it
forth.
gets complicated. So yes, they wouldn't necessarily have to approach the city right away if they wanted to form a TDD. But however, if this was a project that was, I guess I should say, I've never seen a TDD be formed without the consent and the full working of the city or the county behind them. Because generally they bring us in and we are only counsel to cities and counties. And so it's generally in a partnership with the city that we're helping them form these. I would say that most of the time you're seeing a sales tax. So it's probably going to be, yeah, if you're doing a large new retail development and that's going to generate quite a bit of sales tax, they'll do this, yes, to help the flow of traffic. So that's a perfect example for the Paragon Star one in Lee Summit. They're putting in like 15 soccer fields in a retail development there, and that small little interchange and bridge that's over the road, I can't remember what it's called, is too small to handle all the traffic they're thinking is going to happen. And so they're going to redo that interchange to just handle that flow of traffic. So this is generally, I have only seen them and I haven't done a ton. This really, we don't see a lot of these anymore. Generally for big projects where MoDOT's going to be involved.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering if maybe they didn't use it, but if a good example would be out here where the data center is, where they've kind of made the little, I forget what it's called, but the little U-turn lane there on 169, if that would be a good example of when a TDD could have been used.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Any other questions for Megan? Great. So I'll make sure to get that list out to you earlier than when it goes out with the packet. So we can take a look at those. Thank you, Megan.
Yeah.
Any new business for the floor that any of you want to bring forward so we can discuss it at a later date? Nope. I believe, Megan, what we have left are NIDS and special business districts for the incentive toolbox.
We could do
So-
them together and then you guys don't have to listen to me jabber on every meeting.
So one more education session with Megan, and then we can move on from there. Great. I'll take a motion in a second to adjourn.
Sec.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Megan.